In this video segment, we're going to review the process for how the virtual server agent works when we're using IntelliSnap. Now, in a previous video, we already talked about the VSA backup process, and most of that is the same, with the exception of now we're adding in a hardware snapshot. So we're going to reach out to the hypervisor. We're going to locate the virtual machines. We're going to engage VSS for Windows VMs. We're going to do a software snapshot. At that point, we're then going to communicate to the hardware, and IntelliSnap is going to engage a hardware snapshot. Now, first of all, the biggest advantage for this from a data protection standpoint is the idea that for the high transaction VMs, the longer those VMs are in a software snapshot state, the more the redo logs are going to pile up. That's all software-based snapshots. Hardware, which is optimized to deal with snapshots, is going to be much quicker. So even though the transactions are going to pile up, it's being done at the hardware level, not in the software snapshots. Here's the point. I go VSS software snapshot, hardware snapshot, then I could release the software snapshots. So that's the primary advantage when we're talking about backups. But using IntelliSnap for VMs, it's not just about backups. You might be snapping periodically during a day to create recovery points for your data. All right? So we're going to focus here on the backup process. All of this is the same, but since we're snapping at the volume level, we want to make sure that we identify all the virtual machines that we want to snap in a single subclient. So here I got my data store. Here are all my VMs. I want to ensure all of these VMs are listed in the subclient. The data readers option in this particular case is ignored. And what we'll do is we'll quiesce and do software snapshots in multiples of 3. 3 VMs, 3 VMs, 3 VMs, until all of the VMs listed in the subclient had software snapshots engaged on them. Keep this in mind, because this is really important here. If these are all high transaction VMs, even though we're just doing software snapshots and a hardware snapshot, it might take time to quiesce and do software snapshots on these VMs. Thereby, even though we're doing a hardware snapshot, you could still have transactions piling up in your redo logs. So you want to be careful about that. So here's an example. And it's interesting because I had many conversations about this of we could classify it in one of two categories: good virtual environments, bad virtual environments. A good virtual environment is where the administrators of the environment, they know where everything is, they plan it out properly, and they're also going to work with the Commvault administrators, say, okay, we want to isolate these VMs here, these VMs over here, to make the whole process work well. Bad environment is the administrators throw stuff wherever they feel like it, and they don't care. And when the Commvault administrator says, hey, we got to do it this way, they say, we don't care. All right? So in the good environment, we could take all the VMs that we want to do hardware snapshots for, put them in specific data stores, and then we could set up our subclients to the data stores. So this way, VSS, software snapshot, hardware snapshot, release software snapshot, and then we could back them up through the proxy. But let's take the bad environment. That is, there are certain VMs that we'll call trouble VMs, high transactional VMs. What we want to be able to do is do hardware snapshots on them. And some of them are here, some of them in this data store, some of them in that data store, and the virtualization guys don't want to mess with them. Say, we don't care. Fine. You don't have to identify every virtual machine within the data store. Let's say there are 5 trouble VMs sitting in that data store, high transactional VMs, but there's 20 VMs in the entire data store. If I go ahead and just define those 5 VMs in the subclient, we're still going to do the hardware snapshot, but basically what you're going to have is 5 VMs, VSS, software snapshots, properly quiesced. The other 15 are just going to be dirty snaps. It doesn't matter. We're snapping the entire volume anyway. It's just those 5 VMs are the ones that we want to back up. So keep this in mind when you're defining your subclient contents. You could define it based on the entire data store. You could do that. That's fine. Or you could identify individual VMs. You have the option there, but you don't have to necessarily make sure you do the quiesce and the software snapshots of every VM sitting in the data store, only the ones you need to back up. So what about those other 15 VMs? This is one of the best practices that we've followed for a while now, and I think this is just a good idea from a view aspect in the admin console or the console console, you have two different backup sets. One backup set for your streaming backups, one backup set for your IntelliSnap. In the streaming backup or the default subclient, any VMs that I want to do hardware snapshots for, I'm probably going to go ahead, I'm going to filter them out at the backup set level. Say, oh, well, do I have to filter them out? Think about it this way. If you're doing IntelliSnap and you're doing it by data store, and you're not filtering out those high transaction VMs, if one of them storage fee motions into a different data store, you might end up doing a stream and backup of that. So you want to be careful about that. So you filter out any ones that you want to do hardware snapshots from the default backup set, and then you create another backup set, snapshot backup set, or snapshot set. And outside of the ability to filter things out that you don't want, I like it because when you go in the console and you look, you know in the default backup set, this is where all my streaming backups occur. And my snap set, this is where all my hardware snapshots occur. So it's just a good general best practice. So that's IntelliSnap for VSA in a nutshell. There's really not that much more complexity in it. A lot of people think that IntelliSnap is such a difficult thing. Not saying it's easy. You know, setting up your array and getting all that stuff to work, that's a whole nother story. But the intent of this video is to explain how the IntelliSnap and VSA process works.